Welcome to Tax Sale Insiders, the latest from Tax Sale Resources, bringing you information about tax sales from experts in the industry. This educational series from TSR was created to assist new investors with the basics of tax sales. In this episode, Brian and Rachel Seidensticker, the founders of Tax Sale Resources, share their knowledge and experience from over 25 years of combined experience in the industry. They share their insights on how to invest, what to look for, and the vital steps in getting started. So sit back and relax for another episode of Tax Sale Insiders, powered by Tax Sale Resources.
In today's video, we're going to keep it very simple. We're going to keep it very straight. We're going to talk the basics. And then we're going to move into other videos as we go down the line. And we'll do some live, and we want to get some questions from you all. So let's jump right in. Let's introduce Brian and Rachel. Hello, Brian and Rachel. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey.
Carlton, how you doing?
All right. Well, take a moment. Introduce yourselves. Let's start with Rachel. Ladies first, as they say. Queens first. Queens first.
Well, thank you. Yep, as Carl said, I'm Rachel. I'm the COO of Tax Sale Resources, and we've been doing data providing for a long time. I've been working with this guy who is my brother for the same amount of time, and we do data, and that's what we know and do, and have been trying to figure it out in this crazy world of tax lien investing for quite some time. So
awesome. Brian, tell us a little bit about who you are and how'd you come to create Tax Sale Resources? How?
Yeah, that's believe it or not, kids don't grow up with aspirations and being in the taxing industry. That's one of the biggest questions that folks that are in the industry ask each other, just out of curiosity. I was actually, by trade, if you want to call it that, I'm an aerospace engineer. I worked in the aerospace industry, rocket launch group for a little company called Orbital Sciences for almost 10 years. And then around 2008, I actually learned what a tax lien was on a property on the back end of it, or the bad end of it. We were fixing and flipping properties at the time, which many people were due. And I got upside down, got a notice about a tax lien being placed on our house, and I'd heard about tax liens at that point. I always kind of thought it was a fake thing, or get quickly scheme, and shied away from it. But this notice certainly made me think twice about that. I went and bought a book. I can't remember what the name of it was, honestly. Might have been or Tax Lien for Dummies, or what it was. But after reading it, kind of went, oh, wow, this is a whole world I never even knew about. And so started a small investment fund with family and friends money, buying tax liens in a couple states. And one of the first things that we found was just the simple task of finding when these auctions occur, and the data behind the properties, getting that information to know which ones you want to buy, was not easy. And so what is now Tax Sale Resources really started out as an internal database. We all worked remotely, and so the best way to share information was online. And so we built out an online database, and then was recommended in 2009 to make it more public. And that's really when Tax Sale Resources came about. And now it quickly outgrew what we were doing from an investment standpoint. We never did it on a large scale. And the hobby outgrew my day job, if you will, in 2013, and started doing this full time at that time.
Oh, wow. Wow. What a great backstory. And I know there's so much more details to that. The audience doesn't know, but I've had the privilege to learn a lot more about that. And we will get into all of that about Tax Sale Resources. But just real quick, one of the things that Brian did not mention to you all is that the software that Brian created and softwares. Let me be clear. The softwares that Brian created are tools that are being used by hedge funds and large investment pools to do investing, and they are the data source for tax liens. And so Brian didn't really say that part. So that's the part of growing quickly from hobby to what he's doing. They actually provide a lot of data. And if you know who NTLA is, the National Tax Lien Association, the data that they receive at the NTLA is actually coming from the two individuals you see on the screen. So that's just amazing. I'm proud to be here talking to true gurus. There's those that invest. I've been investing since 2001 or somewhere around there. But when you meet the market makers, when you meet the individuals who are providing the data that I use to make investments, it's a big deal, right? It's like meeting Wall Street. You know, you invest in stocks and then you meet the person who's providing the data on Wall Street. That's a different level of understanding in an investment world. So we're going to get really, really deep today into the basics. So again, thank you all for joining us for this video. We got Brian and Rachel Seidensticker with us from Taxel Resources, and we're going to dive into the basics. So these questions came from the Tax Deed Investment Group on Facebook. I actually put out a poll and said, let me know what questions you have. What's the one big thing? And so I've taken all those questions. I brought those all into this video, and I'm going to ask all of those questions. I'm not even going to be gentle. I'm going to ask all of those questions of Brian and Rachel. So you guys are going to have a fun-filled time of learning as much information. So turn off your devices, get away from the distraction, hide in the closet, hide in the fitness room like I'm doing, whatever you got to do, get away. See the wonderful officers. We're all working from home. We're all, quarantined and being safe, and we hope you're doing the same. We care about everyone, and which is why we're not in our offices, and we're here with you personable. So you're actually looking inside of Rachel's home and Brian's home. Looks like his mama put him in the corner, but it's okay.
Close.
And I've been kicked out, so it's all good. We're here, right? All right, so and I'm not going to ask anyone specific to answer the question. Anyone can answer the question. Just you guys can chime in, and if you want to add on, feel free to go so. So let's do this. So let's just start with the basics. I guess the first question that most people ask is, what is property tax investing? What is that?
You want Rachel, or you want me to?
I'll let you do you kick us off.
All right. Well, it's a pretty broad term, right? So in our world, we put property, we break that down into kind of three major buckets. There's what we call tax liens, which you're not actually buying the property, you're buying an interest in the property. The other bucket or extreme would be what we call tax deeds. And typically with that style of investing, you're buying the property. It's pretty closely related to buying any other real estate. It comes along with some weird nuances with getting in, buying the property and then dealing with the title after you buy the property. But it's closer to a standard real estate transaction. And then there's a third bucket, which there's tons of sub buckets of this category, but we try to put it all into one. We call redeemable deeds, and they're kind of a hybrid of the two, where you attend the auction and you may have ownership interest, or you're bidding on ownership interest, but that comes with a whole lot of caveats, redemption periods, things you got to do in order to obtain ownership, etc. And those we call redeemable deeds. And so when we talk about tax sale investing, where we're specifically referring to property taxes, and then the three different types of purchasing or investing in those property taxes.
Tax
Awesome.
distressed would be kind of a term, and that we hear and use a lot. So
Tax distressed.
yeah, I mean that there's an issue, right? So there's a need to help out those homeowners and the counties, basically. So
Got you. Okay. So a good example of one of those would be for the hybrids anyway, and I guess that was the market that I focused on, was Georgia, DeKalb and Fulton County in Texas. those are the hybrids. Those say you go in, you buy an interest in the deed, you have a year and 1 day for redemption for the property owner if they don't redeem. Then you foreclose on their right to redeem, and then you have to take over the property in that manner, right?
Yeah,
Something like
another
that.
another big state would be South Carolina.
Okay, great.
Yeah, but,
Okay.
yeah.
So let's break those down. Let's get into the details. Let's get into the muddy waters of it. So let's get into what liens are. You kind of gave a high view of that. So Rachel, you want to take on to tell us, break a lien down. What is a lien? What does that mean? What are liens?
So I mean, I guess to kind of go back to very rudimentary, but I mean, when a property tax is delinquent, county governments or local governments, depending upon the state, need to collect that property tax for budgets, correct? And so if someone's delinquent, the county's not getting that money to help their budget. And so once that's delinquent, then it can go to what's called a tax sale. And in a lien scenario, the buyer, the investor, is buying the delinquent amount and any fees and other things that come with that, and then gaining an interest rate. So the property owner, the homeowner, can pay that lien back, but there's an added interest rate. And that county is going to add an interest rate no matter what. It's a delinquency. It's like going delinquent on anything. They're always going,
right.
You have to pay a penalty, you have to pay a fee, and there are states that have interest rate and penalties. I mean, there's a lot of different scenarios. And that investor is basically giving the county help in providing that money that they need for the budget, and giving the homeowner time to pay that back and earning the interest rate in between. And that's what the tax lien is basically the lien. There's that lien on the property during that time frame. And each state has different time, from 2 years, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, depends on each state, that they have to repay that delinquency. And so they're taking that property tax plus the interest rate, and the investors earning the interest off of that.
Wow. So, all right. So, okay. And I'm going to play the devil's advocate in this. So, do they own the property when they purchase the lien? So if I go and I buy the lien, it's like, oh, I got the property, I can go kick people out of their homes and.
Nope, not on a lien. Nope, not on a lien. That's definitely not the case.
Okay.
They're literally just buying the delinquent amount. And then they're earning that interest back. In some cases, they can earn the fees that were there too, and so it just really depends. But they're not. Most of the investors that are in that capacity are not interested in owning the home or kicking anyone out. They're there to earn the interest and move on, basically. So,
right.
And there's funding specific to that.
So it's a lien, right? It's like any other mortgage or mechanics lien, or there's a lot of different liens you can place on a property. If somebody places a mechanics lien on your property, it doesn't mean that they have any ownership in your property, right? They're basically telling the county, you can't sell this property without satisfying this lien. And that's essentially what's happening, is that tax lien is placed on the property, and there's no transaction that can happen on that property unless that lien is satisfied. So there's no ownership change per se. It's just a pure lien-based investing strategy. It's very similar to mortgage. I refer to it regularly as a micro mortgage, because you're placing a lien on the property, but instead of it being $200,000 or $100,000, it's $1,500 or $2,000 is the lien on the property.
Right. Wow. Okay. So Rachel, that's a good clarification. And so Rachel, as you talked, you were saying something about 1 year and 2 year. Is that what they mean by like redemption periods and repayment schedules and all of that?
Correct. So each state, has a different set of rules. And so each state is going to be different as far as what that redemption or repayment period can be, or is. So, that literally varies, and that's where there has to be research in your state where you're interested in to understand what that redemption time. But from the investor perspective is, if it's a 2 year redemption, it may take that homeowner that entire 2 years to pay that amount, and you're earning that interest for that entire time. So
Gotcha.
that's where your earnings come from.
Okay. Okay. So Brian, at this point, it sounds like the three buckets as you referred to, the hybrid, the deed, and the lien. It sounds like each one of those have different for the investor side, right? Whether I have $500 in my pocket or 500,000 in my pocket, whatever. My strategy needs to be based off of what bucket I'm jumping in, right? I can't presume to walk into a deed investment market and try to buy a property for, say, $5,000. I mean, I may, it's possible, but the likelihood of that happening is not very high because people are also looking at the value of the property, the potential resale value of the property. They're taking into consideration all of that. You said it's closest to a typical real estate transaction than the lien, where the lien is just a lien. It's it gives an interest in paper, but you can't get rid of the property without satisfying the lien. But with a deed, it's a different ball game. So if I'm strategizing, I'm trying to figure out, okay, I'm new to this thing. I need to determine whether or not I'm looking for interest or whether I'm looking to get possession of the property, right? Do I need to think about those things at this point before I even start investing and researching and figuring all this stuff out?
Absolutely. I think it's finding what your end goal is, or defining what your end goal is absolutely what you need to do up front. I mean, I'll take a little step backwards and kind of toot our horn a little bit, Carlton, because the lien industry, both taxing and tax deeds together, is roughly $10 to $12 billion annually that's sold.
Wow.
And of that, yeah, I mean, it's nothing compared to traditional real estate, which is in the trillions, right? But it's not like it's a very, very, tiny industry. Now, the hedge funds, who have been doing this, they really invented the industry as far as an investment strategy since the 80s or earlier. Comprise probably 70 to 75% of all of those liens that are offered. They buy. Taxa Resources provides data to probably 80% of those hedge funds, and so we've seen an amazingly diverse array of strategies, right? And it goes everywhere from, I don't ever want to own a property. I just want to, they call it the arbitrage spread on that interest. I'm going to go get money from the bank at 1%, and I'm going to earn interest from the county at 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever it may be, to the other end of it, which, I want to own the property. I'm going to be willing to bid, interest rates down to 0, knowing I'm not going to earn anything on this lien for 3 years, because I know there's going to be a small fraction of these properties that turn into actual real estate for me, and that's where I'm going to make my money. And so, yes, the long answer to your basic question is defining, your end strategy or your end goal and your model. It will help you define all of these things, and that can be a complicated question. I mean, it could be easily defined as if you don't want to venture outside of your immediate area. Well, certain states only have tax liens, right? If you are going to invest in Arizona, you're only going to ever be able to buy a tax lien in Arizona. Same with Colorado, same with several states. And so if that is your defining criteria, it's going to make that decision for you. Now, if you're willing to travel and you want to own real estate, then there's, versus owning just earning just the interest, then your potential investment area opens up considerably. And so, yeah, depending on what your end goal is, will define typically what most people will choose to attend or buy. And so if you're after property, naturally the quickest way to owning that property through tax sales is to go to a tax deed auction. Go buy it directly from the county. A much longer play is, buy the liens, and, anywhere between 1% and 5% of those liens might end up being real estate. And then you got the hybrid status in the middle, right, where you will have to wait, but you're probably going to get into the property for less than attending a tax deed sale. So it's kind of that game of how much are you wanting to make versus how long you're willing to wait, versus what is your ultimate end strategy will kind of help define which type of asset you're after.
Well, and I
Wow.
think you also need to weigh how much you have to invest, because coming into a tax deed sale is going to take more upfront capital than maybe investing in a tax lien. Because on a deed specifically, deeds are usually already delinquent for X amount of years, depending upon the state. So, if you just look at that in itself, you have 3 years of delinquencies on a property, plus all the fees and the compiled interest, all of that combined, that's going to take a larger chunk of money to put toward that. And then you've got your titling fees and everything post the deed acquisition process. It really depends where you land in that bucket, as Brian was explaining. I'm just trying to expand a little bit more, because
Awesome.
if you're coming in and you've got $1,000, that's not going to be really ideal to go into the deed market. If you're coming in with 10,000, it's possible. A little more feasible, basically. So it really depends on how the investor's coming in and what kind of monetary strategy that they have.
Awesome. Well, Rachel, you keyed on a point, and then Brian kind of touched it, where he said you'll have to travel if you want to do something different. So if I'm in Texas, I'm in this hybrid state, right? And they do 25% interest out here on a hybrid deed. And there's, I think, the redemption period is 120 days or something like that, right? So essentially, I'm going into a deed. I'm going into a deed ward. When I go to that auction, regardless of the fact that it's a redeemable deed in that 120-day period, and it's something like that, and don't quote me on it because I don't remember the date. I focus more on Georgia.
6 months.
Yeah.
6 months, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
non-homesteaded properties anyway.
Yeah.
So when you go into those deeds, you may go in thinking, okay, this is a lien. Someone's going to redeem this. They're going to redeem this in the next 6 months. But the reality is, the high probability is this is going to turn into a deed deal, and you're going to end up investing upwards of what you would expect. You're not going to win. I've tried. You go in Texas and you try to win a deal with $4,000 or $5,000, and it's like you don't get two outcries in the auction, and you're past that number. So it's like, okay, the value starts at $3,500. We're going to go right for $3,500. Like, okay, $4,000. It's like, okay, $7,000. It's like, what happened to 5 and 6? How did you get from 45 to 7 so fast? And they're like, well, 20,000. You're like, how are you moving so? And I've seen people go through that, and I've gone through that when I first started. And so that's when I started going to Georgia. And it was that lesson in learning hybrids are not liens. They're deeds with redeemable periods, and they're completely different. They're not bidding at them as they would be bidding at a lien. They're bidding at it more so as if they're bidding at a deed. In that experience, my experience. You want to comment on that, Brian?
But in Georgia and Texas, I think you're exactly right. It's more treated as a deed. There are states that are technically redeemable deeds, or at least we categorize them as such. South Carolina, where it's really more like a lien. And what we found is the defining factor between people treating it as a lien versus a deed is what it really comes down to the probability of redemption. What is the probability of somebody actually redeeming it during that short period of time? And in Georgia and Texas, that probability is so low because whoever comes in to redeem, not only has to come up with the taxes that they may have owed, but they got to come up with the full amount. At least this is how Georgia works. I got to look at Texas, but I believe it's the same way. They got to come up with the full amount that was bid at auction plus interest, right?
Absolutely.
So if somebody couldn't redeem, or pay, $3,000 in taxes, if somebody bids it up to 20 grand, what are the chances of them being able to redeem it? It's just, it unfortunately greatly reduces the amount or the chance of somebody redeeming. Now, on the opposite end of the perspective, you have South Carolina, where there is premium bid at an auction, but to redeem it, the county holds that premium, and to redeem, you only have to bring the amount of the original lien in to redeem. And so the county holds that money and again gives that back to the investor. And so the chances of redemption are a lot higher in South Carolina compared to Georgia or Texas. And so because of that, it's much more looked at as like a lien situation as opposed to a deed situation. So it all comes down to, step number one is I'd say step number two is defining what you're looking for, and then researching the statutes to figure out exactly what governs those sales, and that'll help you determine what the chances are you're going to end up with what you're looking for.
Wow. Wow. Good information there. Wow. That's great insight. Thank you for that. So let me ask a question, and it's the obvious. You kind of touched on this a little bit. So, and Rachel did, and again, anyone can answer here. So why do they exist? What is the point of this? Why take people's property in a county and allow investors to come in and throw their money into these people's houses and take their houses away, as people would say? You know, you're letting people come in and steal people's houses, and the county's not responsible. Like, what's going on here? Why are they allowing this to happen? Who's winning in this situation?
I don't necessarily know about, the term winning. I think the big thing that people need to understand, and I think as an investor, you usually come into it with this mindset, but, I touched on this, but all governments, whether it's the county or the local level, or I guess municipality level, because each state runs that a little differently as far as property taxing is concerned, they need to have a budget. They need to be able to pay your schools, pay your teachers, pay your schools, pave your roads, deal with all of those things that we just think that counties can just do. And that's not the case. The property taxes are funding those services. And if a homeowner's not paying those taxes, that's not happening. And so this investment, came along when that was opened up, and investors were able to help counties keep that funding moving, their budgets moving, and homeowners who are, say, in distress, give them a little more time to pay what they owe back. And it's just kind of this, a really great relationship if you kind of look at it in that bubble, in that way. And so, my estimation, it's a service. Do the investors come out with or earn stuff? Heck yeah. I mean, why would you wouldn't do it otherwise, right? Most people aren't going to come in and be like, oh, here, let me just pay your taxes. There is something that needs to be earned there. But that and I think in our opinion, I speak with Brian, I think on this one is why the industry is even in existence. And there's some pushback in some areas, and and each state kind of handles how they view that process differently, and depends on who's elected in government. I mean, all those things can really kind of sway and change. But overall, the industry is there to kind of in a combination of helping both counties and homeowners, to keep things moving forward. And that's, I guess, my view on it. I think Brian and I are pretty similar in that since we've been doing this for so long. But
I think, why does this? I'll take a more philosophical approach to it. It really comes down to what ownership of property means in the United States. But not every country does it this way. But ownership in the United States really doesn't mean technically what ownership, the true definition of ownership of property is. Like, you do not own that property outright. If you refuse to pay your property taxes, you don't own the property anymore. I mean, that's just a reality of owning property within the United States. And so because that's how the United States works, there's got to be a close the loop, if you will. So what happens if you don't pay your property taxes? And that loophole was open for a long time until the first tax lien legislation went into place. And so really what it boils down to is, so if those property taxes aren't paid, and Rachel touched on it, two things happen, right? The budget of the county goes down, typically would go down, because now they don't have that amount to go pay teachers, go pay firefighters, go pay roads. But then also what happens to that property owner? Like, if I'm paying taxes, why does he not have to, right?
Right.
And so that's really where the legislation originally came from, it closed that loop. It said, okay, if you don't pay your property taxes, we're going to give you a period of time to make that better. But if not, then there's the threat of losing that property to the county. And that's pretty much what's happening, is you're losing that property to the county, and the county saying, I don't want to own that property. And so they went out and found a way to allow an investor that knows what they're doing to obtain ownership of that property. And so that's really the crux of how tax sales came about. And it obviously has some positive and some negative connotations to it, but that's the end goal, is to ensure that property taxes are paid and that counties have a budget where they can pay the services that they're supposed to be providing.
And, I mean, I've seen there are places that don't have a process. They don't allow for an investor to come in and help balance those budgets. And what we found interesting in those states, because we've asked questions, and I know the NTLA has as well, but like, why? Why do you do this? And what's interesting, I think, as a whole, homeowners are responsible people who pay their taxes as a whole. And some get into, problems and issues, and there are those distressed, and that happens, and hence why this system works. But then what we found in the places that aren't holding responsibility there and aren't bringing in that investment is you have perpetual delinquencies. So you have people on that delinquent list that are just constantly on the delinquent list because they're not held accountable. And so what we have found fascinating is in asking, and the counties can't really answer the question, is how are you operating then? If you have perpetual delinquencies, where are you getting your money? And it's a question that's usually evaded, but I think a fascinating experiment, because the system is working and has been working for decades now. So
wow. So you are all both touching on some really key things, and I want to just dig a little deeper, and I don't want to go too deep, but we are in the basics, so I want to keep everyone grounded without. No, you're doing great. I love it. It's,
bring down the philosophy.
Bring it on down. But I do want to ask, because you've all and you just made a really great point. You said there are some counties that don't do it. There's counties that do. There's counties that do deeds versus hybrids versus liens versus none at all. So from a national level, there's not the U.S. government says this is how it works. Who controls these? Who really governs these rules then?
The states, for the most part.
Typically, yeah. The state will say this is how we're going to govern them. Now the state may say New York is like this. The state may say, okay, the county gets to decide. They pass the law.
Wow.
And so, some states, it literally changes from county to county. New York is one of those. Most states, the state government, has statutes that govern it, and most of the counties follow it as closely as they can or feel they should. But there's certainly times where it's defined at the local municipality level.
Well, and you'll find that a lot of times, as with many statutes, but there can be a lot of room for interpretation and vagueness in state statutes. And so you will see a lot of county governments or municipality governments that will create their own interpretation of what they feel. We've found that specifically in our home state of Montana, where for a while there was so much vagueness in the law that counties were taking their own version of interpretation, and that created for a lot of confusion. And what's that?
The Wild West.
The Wild West, yeah. But you'll see that, where if a state law is not specific, and I work with the legislative committee with the NTLA, and so you see, that's an ever-changing process. States, some states are more aggressive with keeping up with ensuring that their tax lien law is clear, and some states just aren't, and that's leaving room for a lot of, that causes more problems usually. So it's better when the states have a clear picture of how it should be handled and collected. So,
wow.
And that would be what I would suggest to any new investor is if you're looking for where to start, it would be go to your state's property tax collection piece of statutes. Like that's how we have learned. And that's what we started out researching so that we understood and knew what information to supply to people who are using our website is, what does property tax collection look like and what is set in place? What are the interest rates? Most of that is pretty well directed through the states. So sometimes it's that that detailed process at the sale, that is left for interpretation by the county. But interest rates and, you know, and redemption periods and all of that is usually set pretty clearly. Of course, there's always exceptions, like Brian said, because New York allows, and like Maryland, every county is different. So, so there's a couple states in there that certainly allow more freedom there.
So you both have kind of dropped two key jewels already on the audience that's watching.
I love it when I do that and don't even know it, Carl.
Yeah. So you've already said that in order for someone to get started in this market and to invest is, number one, understand you know, the three buckets. What are the different types of investments into this market? Distressed property taxes. And understanding which one they want to do. So if they understand whether it's a lead, whether it's a deed, whether it's a hybrid. Now that I understand that, now it sounds like the next thing I need to do is start understanding what are the rules, right? Is my state a deed? Is my state the lien? And if it's not, then it's got to be another state. And I think, and we're going to get into this in day 2 and day 3, and I don't want to go too far because I know you guys are going to show off your tool, and I can't wait to show the world what you guys have back there. All these hedge funds are using it, and now the individuals get to use it. This is going to be super awesome. How they can do the research and figure out what state makes sense for them, and so that they can do those transactions without flying across the world. Thank God to technology and Brian, and being able to do that over the counter online. So anyway, so those are the two pieces that they've already given us. Understanding the lien, the difference between a lien, a deed, and a hybrid, determining which one of those makes sense for your investment model. And once you understand that, now we need to start researching the counties and understanding how that fits into what you're doing. Because the county you live in may not be ideal for your investment. You may need to go to a different county. You may need to go to a different state. So is that about right? Am I saying that right, guys?
Exactly. If you were to sum up 30 minutes of us babbling, that's about right.
There it is. You did it.
Awesome. Okay, so we talked about all of this, but now who are these for? Like, can anybody do this? Can my son go down to the auction if I give him an allowance for $500? He wishes. I won't do that. But, you know, it takes $500 or $50,000 and goes. Can anyone do this investment? Do I need a license? Do I need to go register? Do I need to have some sort of degree? What do I need to do in order to invest?
Again, every state can be different. I'll say on a very high level, almost anybody can buy these. You don't, in most cases, you don't even have to be a U.S. citizen, quite frankly. But there are some states or areas where you literally have to be a citizen of that state or county. I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, Missouri still requires you to be a Missouri resident, or did that change?
You can have a Missouri registered agent. And not have to be a citizen, but you have to have a Missouri registered agent working on behalf of your company, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's no licensing process to buy these. There's usually a process of registering with the county, and you typically they make sure you don't have any other delinquent taxes on properties in the county. And if you meet very basic criteria, they'll let you spend your money. And I guess that's a very key thing to also keep aware of, is the county is not going to look out for you either. You know, in researching all of this, and maybe we're getting way into in the weeds, is
buyer beware.
The county will certainly help you buy whatever they're looking to sell, but they're not going to prevent you from buying something that maybe you shouldn't. The best example I can come up with is there are liens on a very regular basis that we see that is literally a chunk of sidewalk or a long narrow strip next to the highway, or I mean, there's really no value to that property to most people anyway, and the county has no problem selling you that lien or that tax deed on that piece of property. And so, you know, take that to heart, or take it with a grain of salt, in knowing that the county will give you enough information to make sure you can buy, but they're not going to do your job for you.
Due diligence, yeah. And
Yeah.
one thing I was going to expand on that too is this is where I think that county or jurisdiction interpretation comes in, Carl, because each, Brian touched on there's registration process. So you asked about your son. I mean, usually that registration requires an ID. So I don't know how old he is, but that's part of it. But they also, many of them require a deposit. So they require you to, have a chunk already kind of in their system so that when you go to buy, they know you're good for it. That's a key piece of a lot of the registration processes. I don't see that. That's probably, lower, probably about 50-50 where they require an actual registration and or deposit, and where they don't. More and more online sales require it versus, live sales. They might just make sure when you come in, you got to show them your driver's license and mark it down on a sheet and you walk in. It's pretty incredible what they don't make you do. But a lot of counties will certainly make sure you've got money up front, and that's something to keep in mind, and have your money ready, because they'll want payment immediately, right at the end of sales. So that's kind of a key piece too. So each county, this is kind of the piece where each county, if you've decided where you want to go, kind of broke this down, right? But then once you decide where you want to go, you want to call that county specifically. Even if you've done all the state statute research and you feel all confident and ready, go and ask that county, because I can bet you that county will have one little weird niche thing that wasn't mentioned in any sort of statutes that you need to be prepared for. So.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like individuals, experts, funds, small businesses, anybody that wants to do this, they can do it. Okay. Well, awesome. That's great. That opens the door for a lot of people who make this type of investment. And again, we're here today with TaxSale Resource founders, Brian and Rachel Seidensticker, and they're just dumping a lot of information on us here on the basics. So if you're not ready for this information, I go get you a double shot of coffee and, be ready to just sit down and check out all this content, because it's super, super good. And I'm so glad to have them here, and they're joining us from their home. Like everyone else in the world, we're all quarantined, and we care about our employees and the people we work with and the people we work around and the society around us. So we're trying to keep everyone safe, strong, and stable and healthy. Let's all keep doing that. And without further delay, we're going to keep going right through this little process. So just a little quick commercial break. So you say, okay, so this is for everyone. So I don't want to use the word easy, but I know there's a lot of gurus and there's a lot of people out there that's making it appear as if this is easy. I want to use that for just a second. And I really want to tag you with this one, Brian, because you went through the experience when you first got started, and I know Rachel came aboard as your tag team partner. But when you were doing this, and now that you know what you know, and I don't want you to include your tool in this conversation at all, because you've made it so easy for people to do this with software that doesn't neglect the fact that there's risk, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But easy, people use that term. Tax lien and tax deed investing is easy. Anyone can do it. All right, we've already qualified that anyone can do it, but the question is it easy? Is it easy?
Well, there's what's easy. I mean, can you call a county today, ask what it takes to register, march down there with, $100,000 of your life savings and buy a property? Absolutely. You could do that. So from that perspective, it is easy. Now, having said that, you could take that $100,000 and then buy it on an absolutely useless piece of property. And so from that perspective, it's very hard, right? It's finding the properties that are worth buying and buying them at a price that makes sense to where you're going to make something, or the liens, right? That is the more difficult piece of the puzzle. And that comes in varying levels of difficulty, right? Is it an auction you have to go attend in person? Or if that's an auction you want to attend, you have to send somebody? Or is it an online auction? Can you just place bids through a platform? Okay, great. but everybody and their mom can also do that. So the competition is going to be greater, right? So none of it is easy in buying a good investment. It's not impossible. You just have to like anything, you got to work at it, find your niche, and you can be successful. It's not an industry that is so competitive that nobody else can enter. It's certainly not in that stage, and don't anticipate it getting there anytime soon. But it is not as easy as some people make it sound.
Okay, good. So you kind of led right into the next part, because you were talking about easy, and then you said spend $100,000 and I could have bought a worthless piece of property. So it sounds like the process is easy. Once I read a statute, it's the statute, right, Rachel? It's not going to change tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. So I kind of get that part, but there's going to be some risk. And so that's where my work comes in. Understanding the due diligence on researching the property, the type of investment, what my return is, what makes sense, what I can bid at, and then taking into account that I'm not the only person standing out there trying to get that property, or online trying to get that property. There's 1,000+ other people doing the same thing. And if I found a gem, so did another 100 people find a gem. And so what is their willingness to invest into that gem versus my willingness? Then it becomes a bidding war, but the reality is it's a risk ratio measurement. It's understanding what the risk is on the property and how much you're willing to put into it. Is that about right? Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm doing this quick, really. I'm not really normally a person that uses analogies, but if you're an art dealer or an art investor and you go into an art, auction, and you know nothing about the artists that are being auctioned off, I mean, you don't know what you're getting yourself into. So doing that research and that due diligence, I mean, that's a term that you'll hear us say over and over and over again. It gets old, but we are such firm believers in that due diligence, because if you don't do your due diligence and you don't have the research behind that, it is so easy to get, as Brian mentioned, I mean, the counties don't really care what you're buying. They're just glad you're there to buy. And it's not that the counties don't necessarily care. It's just that they're like, yay, they're there to balance their budgets. That's what they're there to do. That's why they're offering the tax sale. And, if you're not, and a lot of those properties will stay on the tax rolls delinquent for a long time, because, no one's caring about them. And if you haven't done your research, you can easily get stuck with them. There's a great story of a guy who thought he had found himself a treasure in Florida, and it was literally the mailbox, like a little square, and the mailbox only was on that square.
No way.
Yeah. And so, and it's like, it's those stories, like, had he simply, and I say he, because I mean, there's a whole story out there that we use as an example, but, had he simply looked at the parcel mapping, and saw how, because you can pretty easily point those, through geometry, he would have seen that it was just, this little box and just a small strip between two houses. So,
wow.
That's the stuff that just is important. Now, when you're going in as a large, and buying several liens, it's just something that can be looked at, and you can get that information. And that's just a huge part of, it's like your final step before you enter those doors to go to the auction, in my opinion, is making sure that you have done that piece so that you can comfortably, one, compete, and two, know that if you've won something that's going to earn you something. Because what a great way to get discouraged and to be soured is to end up with a mailbox. That's not what you want to do your first time out, especially. So.
Name of the game, Carl, is preservation of capital. You could do things right 10, 20 times, and you do it once wrong, and you wiped out your gain from those 10 or 20 times you did it the right way.
Wow.
And even hedge funds, institutional funds, guys that do this on, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars at a time, they still make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but it's minimizing those mistakes and making them as least impactful to your investment strategy as possible. That is where you will be different from everybody else, right? The better you are at that, the better you will be at the investment strategy as a whole.
Wow. So, and I don't want to get too deep into this again. We're going to have a show and tell later in the next day or two when you come back and join us for more videos, more interviews. So is this why automation makes sense in this? Because I remember when I started back in, 2000 and somewhere around 2009, 2010, I was going back and forth to Georgia, and I was just like, I drive all the way out here and I do this, and then I do this little drive around and I make sure the property's not burnt down. And then I get to the auction and 90% of the properties I went and looked at had been removed from the list that morning. So it's like, oh my gosh. So I was looking at 20 properties. Now there's only 5 there, and they get bid up to $180,000, like crazy. And just like, okay, I just flew first class from Texas to Florida, spent for a hotel, went out here to do these investments, flew back empty-handed. Like, that was not fun. I mean, well, the trip was fun, but meeting other investors was fun. And there's rules on that when you're meeting other investors, like you can't meet before, you can't say who's going to buy and all that. So when you're going into this market of investing, you got to know what you can and can't do. You can't stand there with your partner and go, hey, you bid on your side, I bid on my side, you bid on this, I'm not going to bid on that, or we'll bump the bids if somebody gets in the middle of us, and we'll kind of just blow them out of the water. Like, there's rules to this stuff. You can't just go out here and, just try and nickel and dime people out of properties, because you can find yourself in court, in jail, fined, or worse, court, jail, and fine, right?
Exactly.
That's a great point, because that's something Sherman antitrust. That's where the federal government does have a role, Carl. We talked about like where, how is this controlled? And that is where the federal government will come down on you. They will rain down on you. And there's been more and more crackdowns of that. So I don't mean to digress too much, but you made a very solid point there. And that's something to be aware of, is counties might not necessarily be paying as close attention to that, because they don't really have jurisdictional power. Pardon?
Sometimes counties are the ones that are participating in that collusion.
Yeah, yes. Well, we won't name names, but yes. There's been a lot of negative news, from that regard. But just know that is where the federal government does step in. They will have spies in auctions, watching for collusion. So just be aware of that, all of you out there as investor. So
awesome.
So, as back to your question, Carl, about automation, it's certainly it's a numbers game. If you are attending an auction to buy a very specific property, and that's the only one you looked at, if you are able to walk away with that property, you are a very, very lucky individual. Is 99.9% of the time that is not the case, because like you said, there's a litany of things that can happen between the time that property gets advertised as being in the auction to the time it actually goes to the auction block. It could redeem, right? Or somebody may contact that property owner and offer them a deal to sell their house. They'll pay their taxes. That happens all the time. That property may burn down in that 30 days. There's a bunch of things that can happen. And so the chances of you picking one property, doing research on one property, attending the auction and buying that one property is close to zero. And so, once you find your niche, then it's maximizing the number of properties that you could potentially buy that fit that niche. That is what makes you successful. And if that means broadening that niche beyond your specific county that you live in, or broadening the type of asset that you're willing to buy beyond, the grade AA single family home to maybe include, C grade, rentals, right? Or vacant land. If you've got a model that allows you to maximize the quantity of properties that you could potentially buy, then your chance of success goes up. And that's where automation comes in, right? It's okay. Well, researching one property doesn't take that long. Researching, I'll use Cook County, Illinois, for example, 63,000 properties in their auction lists, doing each one of those by hand. Good luck. Hope you have a lot of time on your hands. It can be done. It's just, it all comes down to how much time you want to spend doing it.
What your time is worth. What is your time worth?
And knowing if you're if you're competing with your others, which is what you're doing, bidding at the auction, somebody else is trying to get a leg up, right? They're trying to be more competitive. And so chances are there's going to be a fairly sophisticated, fund or individual that is using automation. And so if you're not, I mean, that's like showing up to, the Super Bowl with a high school, JV, football team. You're not going to do real well. So it's, again, a long answer to a very basic question, but the true answer is always a little more complicated.
Sure, absolutely. No, that makes perfect sense.
Spoken as a true engineer right there.
Oh, I'm good.
The football language, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. Sorry, sister jab.
No, that's okay, jab. So
I'll take it.
So, you guys are actually answering tons of questions like, how is this profitable? You've already answered that. You've already basically broke that down. Understanding and maximizing your risk to reward ratios. I mean, you may not have used those terms, but you basically said, if you go and you're borrowing money or you're pulling money out of your 401k, or you borrow, like I said, you borrow money at, say, I'm gonna give you something crazy. You went and borrowed money at 8%, and then you go into an auction and you go down to a bid down auction where the premium comes down to 4%. You're -6 in a hole. You're negative in a hole when you start. So that's not. You have to do the math. It's really simple. You have to do the math. Brian made it really clear. You have to find your niche, and once you do, stay in your lane. Don't jump lanes because someone says, oh, guess what? Britney Spears forgot to pay her taxes. And so now we're just going to jump over here and we're just going to go buy her property, because that's probably not going to happen, right? Now, there are situations. I've heard story of Anna Kournikova. She switched accountants. Somehow or another, they didn't include the property taxes. And so it ran up for a year, and she immediately paid it. Someone kind of won big by the time they got to the auction, paid for it and got back. It was redeemed, so they already made their money. But that's a one-off. That's a you went to the ATM, stuck your credit card in, punched in $100, and then spooed out $100,000 by accident. That's a one-off. That's not going to happen every day of the week. That's just not consistent. And that's the thing about investing. It has to be consistent. You don't go to invest in the Wall Street Journal without understanding the fundamentals of a stock, and you don't go looking at stocks without looking at the paper or through automation. Otherwise, it would take you forever to figure out what Google made 3 quarters ago. It would just take you forever, looking at Q10 statements. So let's go into the part about people not paying their taxes. And Rachel, you leaned on this. Do people really not pay their property taxes? I was under the impression, and again, I'm playing the devil's advocate here. I was under the impression that when I bought my house, this beautiful house we live in today, my mortgage and my property taxes were connected. Like, okay, I got a mortgage, I got a property tax. When I pay my mortgage, the property tax is included. It's got some funky stuff going on with escrow, but whatever that is, I don't have to worry about paying my property tax. And the mortgage company is never, ever, 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 ever going to let my property tax go unpaid. Is that true?
No. So
Thank you.
I won't engineer it. I'm going to say no. No. The thing is that you'd be surprised at how many properties are not in escrow. And so, or you have scenarios where people have second homes and they're not in escrow. And so, there's multitude of reasons why, people don't pay their property taxes. A lot of the time it's, oops, I forgot. Because they're not in escrow, and so there's these second homes, or you'll have scenarios where mortgages were paid off, and it's and that house is paid off, and then they're out of escrow, and like property taxes have to continue. It's not like once you're done with your mortgage, the property taxes are like, oh, you don't have to pay this anymore. So there's many reasons, but no, they're probably, and Brian, maybe you know this percentage, I don't, but because we see so many liens on lists, or property delinquencies in every county across the country, more so than not, they're not in escrow.
Wow.
I mean, that's why they go forgotten and end up delinquent more times than not, which is great for an investor in some ways, because most of the time it's like that, oops, they'll get the notice in 3, like, hey, reminder, and, you'll earn your interest and boom, done. And that's kind of the bonus of the lien side of things. So, that's a good thing in some ways,
Right.
but, from an investor perspective, but yeah.
Well, there's even a surprisingly, or probably alarmingly is probably a better word for it, quantity of properties that do have a mortgage, and there is likely an escrow in place that still go delinquent and end up in a tax sale list. Even the banks and the lenders aren't perfect. Things slip through the cracks. I know a friend that she had moved, and she continued to get. It wasn't even her property anymore. She sold it, but there was a disconnect at the county when they went to record that, and she was still receiving the bills, and eventually she got a tax lien notice, and she was kind enough to reach out to the county and tell them, hey, I am not the owner anymore. You need to reach out to the new owner. Here's their address. Well, that new owner had no clue. Stuff like that happens all the time, or more often than you think, of why things end up on the tax sale list.
And that's a great point, Brian, because that's the recording process, right? And that comes back to the county level. So,
right.
Yeah, I don't really have much
so no, that's fine. Rachel, we're gonna go into that. That leads me right into my next question with you all is, so when are the liens and the deeds issued? Like, how long after? And I know every county and every state may be completely different. So I'm kind of asking a general question, but you kind of help us understand that. Like, I don't pay my property taxes for the next, right? I get my property tax bill March, right? January, whenever that is, I don't even recall. It's in my mortgage. It's in my mortgage. And my mortgage company's got it under control, right? So I don't worry about it. Right? I'm gonna go look, make sure my property's not on the auction blocks, by the way. So, but at what point, does this happen? When does it go from you owe the county property taxes, you didn't pay it, okay, we're tired of waiting for you, boom, we're gonna convert this to an issue of some sort of deed or lien?
So I'll talk to this point a little bit, because yes, it does depend on each state. So most states, and I always say this word because there's so much difference state to state in all of the statutes. So when I use the word most, I'm being very general, because there will always be exceptions to the rule. But most states in the lien side, if they're a lien state, it is 1-year delinquency. And so, those property tax bills will come out, usually they're half years, right? So you'll get two bills technically a year. And that following year, in 2020, so right now, most states are collecting upon 2019 delinquencies.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
absolutely.
now there are states that are, give it a 2-year gap. Illinois is one of them. So, but they're usually, it's not a 2-year gap, it's that in 2020, they're collecting on 2018 taxes. So there's just always there's like a 1 year in between, essentially. Gotcha. On the deed side, it's a bit more extreme, because it's gone to deed because it's usually, 3 to 4 years delinquent. It's all compiled. The state says the county's done all their noticing. They've said, hey, for years and years and years, all that's collecting. And their final notice is saying, okay, you have not paid. This is now being filed jurisdictionally through an attorney's office, normally through an attorney's office, and now being collected upon in that way. And it's all of the delinquencies in one.
Wow.
So sum that up, Brian.
So when a person sees, and I'm gonna get a little bit into the research and the due diligence here, just a little bit, because I'm leading that way, and I may even hold that for the next one, so Brian can show us that automation that hedge funds and those big guys are using, how to strategize and do the due diligence. But is that why sometimes when you go and you're looking, you're doing the research on the property, and you realize, wait a minute, this property was in a tax deed auction for the last 4 years in a row. Someone else bought it, right? Then another tax bill comes out, and so the person who bought that lien should be responsible for paying the first lien, but they don't pay it, so that gets to auction. So you have 3 or 4 people owning a lien or deed. Well, that won't be a deed; it would be a lien in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And then so now you got 4 people standing on top of this lien, all wanting some sort of interest rate out of it, right? Is that where that confusion happens? Is that how that all comes out?
Yeah. Yeah, so if they don't pay their, subs, so say someone does pay that delinquency, and then the next year, New Jersey's great, has this process, and they don't pay the next year's sub payment, basically, or the next year's delinquency, someone else can come into the sale and buy it. So it does get messy. I think that's part of, as your investor, it's kind of a bonus. Like, once you buy that delinquency, if you stay on top of it, like, hey, I in some cases, there are some places that give you first right to that, but that's pretty rare. That's pretty rare. You have to be the one that's doing the research to see if that's going to come up delinquent. Sometimes you can pay that preemptively. That's pretty rare. But for the most part, again, I use the word most, it is your job to know whether or not your lien that you've purchased, the parcel that you've purchased that lien on, is gone delinquent again, and you have to purchase that sub.
Wow.
Now you can file it before tax sale, though. That's kind of one of that places that you can actually pay that before it hits the tax sale. But if you don't, that county will be putting it on tax sale.
But you won't get the interest on that, right? I'm sorry, Brian. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Sorry.
You made a good point, Rachel. Go ahead.
That varies by state, though, too. And there's, Florida, which is very popular as well. They don't give investors the right to buy that sub. I mean, every lien is put up to the highest bidder, if you want to call it that. It's, bid down state, but is put up every year, and so it's not uncommon to have a very good property that has up to 7 years of different lien holders.
Wow.
On it. Now, most states, like Rach said, Illinois, New Jersey, most states give the prior lien holder the chance to pay those taxes before they go to sale. So it's kind of again, it all comes back to how that state operates.
Do your due diligence. Do the research. Go and get the county laws and start understanding what you are investing in and the rules. It's not as easy as everyone says it is. There's work. Obviously, going to the store, putting the money up, and getting what you want is easy, right? That's an easy thing. But there's a process to all of that, as Brian and Rachel are just so grateful to share this information with us. I'm so grateful that they're sharing this with us. That it may sound easy, bid, win, make money. But before you bid, there's a lot of work that needs to go into that and understanding what you're bidding on before you can even start calculating what you could potentially generate. Mm-hmm. And as Brian said, if you're going to the auction because you found this 1 4-bedroom, 3-bath, beautiful house in DeKalb County that you just gotta have as a second home, and you think you're gonna walk in this auction and get that one property out of all the properties listed there, now you're probably not. You're better off buying a lottery ticket. I'm gonna say that. You're better off buying a lottery ticket, and while you're there, buy me one too. You want to go in knowing that you have a handful, and Brian and Rachel are really making it very clear. If you find your niche, and your niche is whether it's liens, deeds, hybrids, don't stop there. Once you figure out that your niche is a lien or a deed, then look at the other states that are similar, that have the hybrid, that has the deed, that has the lien, and reach out to those states and start understanding those counties and those laws so you can figure out whether or not those interest rate meets your requirements, whether the strategy fits to what you're trying to do, so you can employ all that. And on our next video, in our next interview with the TSR founders, they're going to bust out the tools that they use for the experts, the real experts, the hedge funds and the people dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into this stuff, and that's just crazy. It's just I can't even fathom that right now. But we're going to get to use it, and if you guys stick around long enough, you'll probably end up getting it because Brian's made it super duper affordable for everybody. But I don't want to end on that note. I want to touch on a couple more topics because I know everyone's sitting back on, wow, this is really good information. I'm saying it's really good information. I've been investing for almost 20 years. So it's definitely tenor has nothing to do with it. It's how deep you're in it every day. And obviously Brian's been in it since 2008, and I've been in it for 8 years, his senior, and I don't know 3/4 of what he knows. So that's just a big deal there. I understand the market, but there's a lot of data behind that. And fortunately, we are talking to the data providers. They are it. So getting this information is definitely a blessing. And I'm grateful that you all are here. Thank you again, Brian and Rachel, for being here today. Taking time out of your day, taking time out of your quarantine to be here with us.
Yeah.
You could be homeschooling right now. What do you mean? It's way funner than this. Brian's like, I am homeschooling. I'm homeschooling you guys. All right. So you kind of talked about what we need to do invest, basically researching, right? And now, so I want to get into the what and whys, or maybe you guys want to hold that off. But I do want to kind of lead a little bit that way, if you guys have time. And if not, by all means, we could do it on day 2. We can come back because I know we're going to do a lot of this. But I want to start, I'll tell you what, I'm going to ask one more question. This is just bothering me. And then I'm going to keep the rest of the questions for our next interview, which will be very soon.
Only one questioning, Carl.
One more.
Okay. Make it a good one.
All right. Okay.
No pressure.
Where can I buy these instruments, right? So these deeds, liens, hybrids, they're all instruments. Can I buy them at the county courthouse? Do I buy them online? Can I buy them from another investor? Can I buy them from some real estate group? Can I buy them from you? Can I buy them from Carl? Can I buy them from, I don't know, Sam's, Walmart? I don't know where. Tell me where I can buy these things. Everywhere.
That's like that's not quite as broad as one question saying, "Teach me about tax liens," but it's pretty broad. Well, I'll put the different phases, and then that'll kind of help answer where you can buy these things from. Everything originates with I'll call it jurisdiction, whether that's the county or the municipality, in some cases the state. Everything originates with them. And so we call that the primary purchase, right? You're buying it directly from the source. And we also refer to that as the primary auctions, if it happens to be an auction. They also have what we call over-the-counter OTC lists, where it's not an auction. You're still buying them on the primary market because you're still buying them from the county or the jurisdiction, but you're not having to compete for them, if you will. Now, after that instrument is sold to an investor, it can still be sold. At least in most states, it can still be sold. That investor could sell it to another investor, or that, an individual, and that's typically called an assignment of a lien. And again, I liken it to mortgages. Mortgages are sold all the time. I'm sure most folks that have a mortgage have seen a notice that says your mortgage is now transferred to such and such, right? The same thing happens, right? So you can buy tax liens from individuals or other funds. You asked, can you buy from us? We do not sell tax liens ourselves. So that's not something you can reach out to us and we'll sell you tax liens. But there's more ways to getting into tax liens beyond just buying them at the auction.
And deeds.
And deeds. Yep, both.
Awesome. Well, I know I said one more question, but you mentioned something, and I got to ask this. This is just it kind of wraps up everything we talked about, right? Tax deeds, liens, and everything. So once I buy this thing, right? Obviously, the county, the state is selling it to me. Once I acquire this interest or property, does everything else fall away? Does the mortgage go away if there's a mortgage? Does the any other liens and deeds and anything else any other liens against the properties, encumbrances, as they say, on the property, do they all fall away the moment I take an interest? Does the mortgage just disappear if I take possession of it as a deed, or kind of expand on that a little bit?
I'll start, Rachel, and you can fill in where I'm off here. But yeah, I guess the standard, every state's different, right? And so every state, you gotta kind of know what you're getting yourself into. But I'll take a step back and explain liens in general, because a tax lien in the end is just like a mortgage or just like a mechanic's lien, but there's a priority list to those liens, right? You always hear of, is it a first priority lien? Is it a first mortgage or a second mortgage? What they're saying is it is a first priority mortgage or a second priority mortgage. Who gets paid off first? And really what you need to figure out is where in the list of lien priority do tax liens lay? In most states, they lay higher than a mortgage. And so when you buy that tax lien, does the mortgage go away? No. But if you foreclose on that tax lien, part of the process of foreclosing is notifying that mortgage holder. And if they choose to do nothing, then that mortgage is essentially deemed negligible. It's null, right? It's got foreclosed out on because it's lower on the priority. Now, there are certainly several liens that are higher priority than tax liens, or at least on par in the same priority level. And so you got to figure out what those are. Usually municipal liens, so code violation liens, community development district liens, that's the name of them in Florida anyway, are equal priority. And so when you foreclose on that lien and you gain ownership of that property, you may wipe out the mortgage, which is $200,000, rough estimate. But you may still have code violation liens for a few $1,000s. You may still have a CDD lien that's tens of thousands of dollars. So it doesn't mean you get a squeaky clean deed at the end of the day. And that's really why we refer to it as a tax deed and not a real estate warranty deed. And usually there's additional process you have to go through in order to get a squeaky clean warranty deed, and that's called a quiet title in most cases. And so, yeah, again, a long answer to, because it's a much more complicated situation than a yes or no.
Awesome. Good insight. Rachel, did you want to fill
I
in any
think
gaps? I don't think
the
you had
only
any.
thing kind of to nutshell it a little bit is that in most cases, liens, if you're just doing a lien, buying the lien, gaining the interest, you don't have to worry about all those so much, but there is a percentage of the risk that you are going to eventually own that risk or benefit, depending on how you look at it, of owning that property. And I think that's what Brian's speaking to, is if you get into that category, if there's no redemption during that redemption period and you can now what's called a tax foreclosure on that property or whatever, then you've got all these other pieces to worry about. So still an important piece of your due diligence as a whole to understand what comes with that property. But again, that just really depends on how far along in the process you end up. If you're just in there and you're going to be buying that lien and it has a high likelihood of redemption, which, we track that in some areas, but like we can, that, then you don't have to worry about all those, that's because you're not getting to that foreclosure process, or it's not the deed, it's not a deed. And so you don't have all that's attached to the titling process. So I think that'd be the only kind of clarifying fact in there is that stuff is definitely concerning if you get to that kind of next level with a lien.
Got you. Well, again, I want to thank Brian and Rachel Seidensticker for coming out and joining us and making us take them away from homeschooling and quarantine to share some really great insight into the distressed tax property market. I think this is awesome. And so all of you on the Facebook group, you're going to have first dibs at watching this. You'll get the next invitation to our day 2 where we'll have another interview, and we'll get deeper into not so much of the high level, what is a lien, what is a deed. I think you all pretty much got that information, but now we're going to start looking at the mechanics of it. Let's look at how do you do the research, how do you do the due diligence. And I think basically from the information they've shared today, they've really given us the basics of what we need to begin investing as investors or be interested in investors.